Okay, so welcome to the Fear the Fro podcast, guys. This is one of these collaborative audio video editions, and today I am joined yet again by one of my favorite recurring guests. I just keep going back to the well again and again. McNuggets, Mike Lucas of the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. Thanks for taking the time to join me, Mike.
I have taken the mantle of the let's push the Mobley DPOY propaganda campaign. So any podcast that wants me to come on and let's talk Mobley for DPOY, I will accept the challenge. And I don't know if you've seen, Bob, but I started this Wednesday morning. We talked about it on UCSS today. The poly market graphs that try to predict award winners now have Mobley ahead of Draymond. So I'm not saying I did it because our platform on UCSS is not that big. Mobley did go on the Hoop Collective podcast as well to campaign for himself, but I feel like I am partially responsible considering who I sent some of this information to, including former Cavalier Channing Frye, also the Cavs' entire PR staff, which tweeted out a graphic earlier today that didn't even include any of the stats, and they had 3-point makes this season, as if that has any indication as to why Evan should be the DPOY. But I digress. I'm happy to be here, Bob. Let's talk some Evan Mobley propaganda.
I do think every little bit helps, and that's been the frustrating part of this whole thing is that, last week I listened to the Hoop Collective. Zubac comes on, and admittedly, feel like he's a bit of a dark horse, but just the fact that guys who are in contention for these defensive accolades it's turned into a PR campaign in some sense. And on one hand, when I heard Jackson ask the question and tee up Darius and Evan to make those statements, there's that part of me that's like, well, I wish this wasn't necessary. But at the same time, it is necessary. And so I want people to lean into it. And so even when people say stuff to me like, well, these are just awards, and if Evan doesn't win, it actually is kind of financially beneficial. So it's not the worst thing in the world. You shouldn't care so much. That's easy to say. It's a lot harder to do in practice when the Cavaliers now have essentially locked up the 1 seed. And you know what? It just feels unjust. So I'm going to continue to rail on this point.
And we need something to talk about. They haven't played a meaningful basketball game in about a month, Bob. And these last 3 are now completely irrelevant to their Eastern Conference standings. And the one thing I'll give Draymond before we dive into this, Draymond's a very, very, very good basketball player. He's going to be a Hall of Fame basketball player. He's an elite podcaster, or at least an elite propagandist with a platform to push his own stuff. And for as good as Evan and Darius are, and I think I have a pretty good relationship with both, so I say this with love, Darius on the spot did not do a great job, and he shouldn't have, because he shouldn't have these advanced analytics in his back pocket ready, but Evan is not comfortable talking about himself on camera yet. He's gotten better, Bob, but he is still not at the level of a Draymond Green. I mean, it's basically like a 16 versus a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament in terms of self-promotion between Draymond and Evan and the rest of the Cavs. They can yell DPOY behind interviews all they want, but that's not the stuff that's gaining the traction that Draymond is. So Draymond, elite self-promoter. Evan, still finding his voice in the NBA realm. And I hope that from what I send them, from what we talk about, from some of the other podcasts that he's going to get a chance to go on and campaign for himself, he comes out of this a much more confident public speaker, because it is sad that this is the state of the NBA we are in, but the awards have become political campaigns. And if it's going to be a political campaign climate, you better be a damn good self-promoter. And that is still part of Evan Mobley's game that needs to develop.
Totally agree. I did want to ask one thing before we start bludgeoning people with some data. And that is, did you see Draymond Green sell at the end of that San Antonio Spurs game where he gave up 3 buckets?
Yep.
And then they ended up losing in what was a must-win game.
Yep.
In the Golden State Warriors. It was magnificent. And these are the type of things I think back to when things really felt like they went off the rails with Mobley, which was in that 4-game losing skid. And a lot of attention got paid to the Harden layup and then the end of the Sacramento game. Meanwhile, since that point, we have seen Allen and Mobley absolutely destroy Zubac in the rematch. And then again, this situation with Draymond. And I just don't know that they're carrying as much weight from a narrative standpoint. And maybe that's just because I'm hyper fixated on the Cavs element of it. But even in the aftermath of that game today, I guess I expected a lot more coverage than it got, because Draymond, in addition to multiple turnovers in crunch time, which have nothing to do with defense, but essentially it set up buckets on the other end, be it threes, be it Keldon taking him in the post. It was a variety of everything. It was, bad help defense. It was bad closing out on a three-pointer. It was bad defense at the rim. Maybe not bad defense at the rim, but ineffective because he still made the bucket. So I would like to think that in addition to all the narrative work, the only thing that concerns me a little is with nothing left to play for and Mobley not in the lineup, essentially his case is on tape. The numbers are done. There's not going to be any more meaningful basketball to play. And the one thing that I think still awaits for a guy like Draymond is that Clippers matchup will be very meaningful at the end of the season. And it includes another guy who will be in a lot of these conversations in Zubac. So I think that's the only thing that kind of worries me. I'm quietly confident that what we saw from Draymond last night and the way that Cavaliers ended this season and that run that Mobley went on after the losing streak in terms of just piling up blocks and steals will be enough to push him over the top. But
yeah,
I wanted you to kind of make the case for Evan. You sent me a bunch of data, and I'm sure people have heard this who listen to the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show or pieces of it. But before we get into paralleling Evan against the rest of the field for people who I've heard mentioned for Defensive Player of the Year, I think a good way to set this up, because Mike has done so much with this subject, is to let him kind of lay out the case for Evan Mobley and some of the impressive accomplishments he's compiled this season.
All right, so this is all Evan versus Draymond, by the way. So we went into it for the purposes of the UCSS conversation today. If Evan and Draymond are the two guys that you are comparing, where do these numbers back up Evan's claim? So this does not include the Zubacs and the Jaren Jackson Jr.'s and the Lou Dorts of the world, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is simply Evan versus Draymond. But when you look at some overall and some individual statistics, Bob, team success in terms of wins, losses should not count unless it's a tiebreaker and you want to award the team that's just been better this season. But you can tell some important characteristics of a guy's Defensive Player of the Year resume based on how the team performs with him on the court versus when he's off the court. Per 100 possessions this season, Bob, the Cavs are 4.8 points better defensively with Mobley on the court than they are with Mobley on the bench. 4.8. Remember that number. Per 100 possessions, the Warriors are 2.8 points better with Draymond on the court than when Draymond is on the bench. So 4.8 points better defensively per 100 possessions with Evan on versus Evan off. Only 2.8 points better per 100 possessions defensively with Draymond on versus off. Advantage? Evan Mobley. Darius Garland in his post-game press conference on Tuesday talked about the fact Evan doesn't foul. And that is incredibly impressive considering the fact he contests 10.4 shots per game, Bob. That's second in the NBA. 10.4, remember that number. Now, the higher percentile, the better for these two statistics. He contests 10.4 shots per game. According to Cleaning the Glass, he's in the 81st percentile for block percentage and the 90th percentile for bigs in foul percentage. Basically, he contests a lot of shots, he blocks a lot of shots, and he's not a hacker. In comparison, Draymond contests 9.1 shots per game, so almost 1.5 fewer than Evan Mobley. He's in the 31st percentile in foul percentage. Evan was in the 90th. And just the 60th percentile in block percentage. Evan was in the 81st. So Draymond fouls a lot more, blocks fewer shots, and contests 1.5 fewer shots per game than Evan Mobley. Advantage, Evan Mobley. Defensive rating as a team. It's not the end-all, be-all stat. It does not determine the overall effectiveness of a team's defense, but it is an advanced statistic that gives you a good indication on how good a team is defensively with certain players on and off the court. When Evan Mobley is on the court, the Cavaliers have a defensive rating of 108.6. That would rank second in the NBA this season if that was their overall team defensive rating, just behind Oklahoma City. When Evan is on the bench, the Cavs team defensive rating is 111.9. There's a 3.3 difference in defensive rating when Evan is on the court versus when Evan's on the bench. The Warriors with Draymond on the court this season have a defensive rating of 109. That would be tied with Orlando for second, behind the Cavs with Evan Mobley. When Draymond's on the bench, and this includes last night's game, the Warriors have a team defensive rating of 110.4 when Draymond is off the court. So it's a 1.4 point difference in defensive rating for Draymond on his on-off splits, a 3.3 point difference for Evan Mobley. So the impact of Evan on and off the court is significantly bigger than it is for Draymond when he is on and off the court. One of the knocks against Evan Mobley, one of the arguments I've heard as to why Evan shouldn't be DPOY is, well, he plays with Jared Allen. It's another elite rim protector. Okay, fair. That is valid. Jarrett does a very good job at protecting the rim. He's very versatile, laterally quick, can switch 1 through 5. But the Cavs' defensive rating gets worse by 1.1 points when Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are on the floor together and Jarrett goes to the bench. So whatever their benchmark number is, when Jarrett goes to the bench and Evan stays on, the team's defensive rating gets worse by 1.1 points. Not a giant drop-off, right? 1.1, not crazy. Well, in the 27 games that Jimmy Butler has played with the Golden State Warriors, their defensive rating gets worse by 5.4 points per game when Jimmy Butler takes a seat and Draymond stays on the court. So a 1.1 decrease when Jared Allen goes to the bench, but a 5.4 point per defensive rating decrease when Jimmy Butler goes to the bench. A defensive possession doesn't end, Bob, till you grab a rebound. And this is the biggest advantage for Evan Mobley. They play roughly the same minutes per game. Evan's at 30.4. Draymond's just over 29, so about a 1 minute difference. But Evan averages 9.3 rebounds per game. That's 11 per 36 minutes if you want to be precise. Draymond averages 6.1 rebounds per game. That is 7.6 per 36 minutes. Out of 419 qualifying players on B-Ball Index, Evan Mobley ranks 53rd in defensive rebounding talent, which takes into consideration the other guys on your team, who you're boxing out, et cetera, et cetera. 53rd out of 419. Draymond's 301st out of 419. Gigantic advantage, Evan Mobley. Blocks, steals, Evan's at 1.6 blocks, 0.9 steals per game. That is 2.5 stocks, a combination of the two. Draymond's at 1 block and 1.4 steals. That is 2.4 stocks per game. Advantage, Evan Mobley. Defensive win shares, I don't know how they calculate it, Bob, but Evan's at 3.7, Draymond's at 3.2. Advantage, Evan Mobley. And last but not least, B-Ball Index, I mentioned it earlier, does a great job of putting every qualified player, there's 419 in this instance, into percentiles of how they do in different defensive situations. Some of these advanced metrics favor Draymond, and I'll point those out. But look how close Evan is to Draymond in the ones that Draymond is truly elite in. And look at the difference in the gap, I guess, between Evan and Draymond and the ones that Draymond is not nearly as close to Evan in. In terms of rim protection, you want to be high. 100th percentile is the best you can be. Evan's in the 96th percentile in rim protection. Draymond is in the 91st percentile. Rim contest per 75 possessions. Evan, 92nd percentile. Draymond, the 61st percentile. Rim deterrent. So how many times does a guy see you at the rim and say, no, I don't want any part of that? 98th percentile for Evan, 100th percentile for Draymond. He ranks number 1 out of 419 in rim deterrence.
Nobody wants to lose an eyeball, get kicked in the balls.
I do think that plays a factor, Bob. I'm genuine serious. I do think that plays a factor. Evan's top 5, so it's not a gigantic gap whatsoever. Rim point save per 100 possessions. Evan, 92nd percentile. Draymond, 85th. Blocks per 75 possessions. Evan, 93rd percentile. Draymond, 85th. Help defensive effectiveness rating. Draymond's in the 99th, Evan in the 98th. Basically a wash. They literally are one person separated. Number 3 versus number 4 in the NBA in help effective rating. Screen mobile defense, which B-Ball Index categorizes as how do you navigate around screens as a big. Both very good. Draymond 97th, Evan 92nd. And screener rim defense, once again separated by 1 percentile point. Draymond 98th, Evan 97th percentile. So when you look at all this in conjunction, I know it's a lot of numbers to throw at you at once, Bob.
It is, but
Evan makes a bigger difference, and the gap between Evan and Draymond and what Evan does well is bigger than the gaps that Draymond does slightly better than Evan. And some of those numbers also help Draymond. I am well aware that some of them help Draymond. But there is not a single category where Draymond excels that Evan doesn't. You cannot say the same in reverse.
Okay. Now, Fro Faithful who took that in, I would recommend you go back and you listen to the whole list again. We're going to touch on some of these things, but what I'm going to do here, I want to approach this slightly different than Mike did, because I agree with his general sentiment here, which is that there are plenty of areas. I don't care how much value you put in some of these composite metrics and advanced metrics. I see it all the time, all day long on Twitter. People will turn to Basketball Index. They'll throw up things that I'm sure they don't even understand how are calculated.
Hand up some of the ones.
Myself too.
Guilty.
There are some things where it's like, well, if you can't tell me how you arrive there, it's going to be hard for me to do anything other than look at it, say, I'm glad you have a formula that gets there, but All I have is my eyeballs and the data that I can understand in front of me. Now, I will say, Basketball Index, I love the site, but I have seen multiple times when you look at something like perimeter isolation as a metric, if you go and you just look at the whole list, all the guys in the NBA, you can filter it by different types of defenders, mobile big, anchor big, point of attack guy. If you look at the bigs, you will see guys with a higher rating than Evan, who nobody in the basketball-loving world would say is a better perimeter isolation defender. Because, and quite frankly, we don't know how the metric arrived at that. But what I would say is take the debate about Mobley versus Draymond out of this. Anytime somebody presents you with a metric devoid of context, the responsible thing to do would be to go to source, look at it, and try to see, okay, can I understand how they arrived here? Another thing I want to say about these catch-all metrics before we get into some of the just, blue-collar man counting stats is that a lot of these catch-all metrics, things like defensive LeBron, defensive basketball plus minus on Basketball Reference, defensive EPM on dunksandthrees.com. They're all great things. And I think when you look at them, you see some correlation between this numerical value they give you and the quality of defender as we know them to be through eyeball tests. But the problem with any box score based advanced metric is that there is noise from the team that exists with all of them. And that isn't limited. I mean, there's plenty of things. Plus minus just as a basis is that's something very easy that everybody understands. It's how many points you score on the court versus how many they do. If you have a positive plus minus, it reflects well on you as an individual, but it's really as much about the people around you as it is you. You're playing and winning units, and that's great, and certainly that's valuable and something that will help a player get more floor time, get more accolades, but you can't take it as a be-all, end-all metric. And that's why I wanted to approach this from a different angle here, which is I did something called my Defensive Player of the Year composite score. I attack this on two fronts. The first one is more of a counting stat-based thing, because what you'll find over the course of this debate is that when it comes to Draymond, the entire case is propped up on advanced analytics because his counting stats aren't even remotely close to a guy like Evan Mobley, let alone some of the other guys on this list, be it Ivica Zubac, Dyson Daniels. Dort is a guy who, again, his is based more on individual metrics. A lot of his metrics, you'll see this and you'll say, how the hell is he in this conversation? But that's why context, nuance, details around it are always a big factor. So the first thing I did here was I looked at 7 different, what I would term counting stats, stuff that's mostly just based on volume equals good, as a way to compare all the guys you see on the screen right now. Evan Mobley, Dyson Daniels, Thompson, Zubac, Dort, Draymond Green, Jaren Jackson Jr. The first of those 7 things was blocks. Now, what you'll see down on the bottom of the screen is a tally of the number of blocks that these guys have got, and then right above it, where that positions them amongst the NBA. So, as you can see here, it's left to right. Evan Mobley, the most blocks of all these guys in this conversation, and it goes down to last place, which would be Dort. Draymond is 5th amongst these people, 25th in the NBA, versus Evan, who's 5th in the NBA. Now, I think what I came away from this experience with is that we knew Evan was going to run away with the counting stat blocks lead. He may not even hold on to it because right now he's 2 up on Jaren Jackson Jr., and we've got nothing to play for. So he could get past, but that's also part of the reason I wanted to do this today, Mike, because when I tell you how I tabulated my composite rank, essentially what I did was I took where these guys stacked up 1 to 7 in all of the categories we're going to go through, and then I tabulated the composite rank of these 7 categories that we're going through right now. And that is what helped me determine, okay, how would I place these guys? How would we look at these in terms of counting stats? So the second one was steals. Dyson Daniels is running away. And this is one of these things that gets missed when we talk about where guys rank in the league. You'll see a lot of things talk about percentiles. But if second place has 100 steals, and if first place has 223 steals, there is not a significant way to represent that in terms of percentiles because one guy's first, one guy's second. Dyson Daniels, the biggest part of his case is not going to be on his performance in head-to-head matchups. It is certainly not going to be on team metrics because Atlanta is the 20th best defense in the NBA right now. There are even a lot of stats you're going to see in this little presentation that show that the offensive players perform better when he's on them. But in terms of a few areas, one of them being steals, one of them being deflections, and just stocks in general, because he is a good rim guard, I guess. It's not like he's going to pile up blocks, but in terms of contesting shots at the rim amongst guys who primarily play on the perimeter, Dyson performs well above his station. So the third one, deflections. Again, Dyson Daniels is over 150 deflections ahead of second place. That is how far ahead of everybody else he is. But again, these are the categories that tend to lean towards guards. Now, I want to just click back a couple here. Notice what you're seeing with Thompson. This is a guy who's got basically no talk as far as a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate. But what you'll see over the course of these stats is that he's a bit of a fill all the gaps well, don't dominate at any one thing, but do everything reasonably well. And that'll be relevant later in this discussion. Contested shots. Contested shots, according to the NBA, are when a player is within 3.5 feet of a shot as it goes up. So basically, the guy who's contested the most shots is Zubac, 779. That is first amongst these guys. It's first in the NBA. Evan is a respectable fifth in the NBA with 730 contested shots. Now, coincidentally, he has a teammate who has even outpaced him. Jared Allen is third in the NBA. That tandem of Mobley and Allen, every time somebody tells you, well, he's got Allen, it helps him. There's truth to that, of course. But there's also 1,480 combined contested shots between the two guys in the front court of the Cavs, which is an absolutely obscene amount. And knowing that Jared Allen is a vacuum for contesting 750 shots, a lot of Evans' contests do not come at the rim. He spreads them across the floor. It's the true versatility of him being able to go from the rim to the three-point line. So we've knocked off 4. The next one, defensive boards. They end possessions. It's a simple concept to understand. Again, Zubac, Evan Mobley, Thompson, we know this all too well from our losses to the Houston Rockets. He was a massive factor on the boards. It goes down. You'll see again and again that Lou Dort is towards the bottom of these counting metrics because the large part of his case is made up on what he does to take guys out of the game. Fouls. Now, we've talked about it. Evans talked about it. You will see on this chart, it's essentially reversing a lot of the counting stats. The guys who dominate this, Jaren Jackson Jr., first in the NBA in personal fouls. Draymond Green, 8th in the NBA in personal fouls. Lou Dort, Dyson Daniels, both very aggressive defenders. Not a surprise. They fall 3-4. And Evan Mobley, our boy, second in contested shots amongst these 7 guys, last in fouls. Last being the best. Minutes. Now, minutes I threw on because essentially if a guy's a good defender, you want him on the court, right? I would think that that would be something we can all agree upon. So as you'll see here, Draymond Green, who they tell you is a defensive player of the year candidate, he's played the least of any of these 7 guys. Zubac, on the other hand, an absolute warrior. Dyson Daniels, again, available, playing tons of minutes, credit to him. So we've got those categories, and now we arrive at essentially what is the composite score. I ranked them 1 to 7 in each of those categories, and then I added all of those numbers. So, if you do the math here, if you finished first in blocks and first in steals, your composite score would be 2. Essentially, what I'm saying is a lower number is better here. So, on this graphic, what you'll see is when you tabulate all of those things, blocks, steals, deflections, contested shots, fouls, minutes, defensive rebounds, the best performer of these 7 guys was Evan Mobley. Second was Zubac. Third, Dyson Daniels. Fourth, Thompson. Fifth, Jaren Jackson Jr. Sixth, Draymond Green. And 7th, Lou Dort. Now, I mentioned it before, but it's worth saying that Lou Dort was done no favors by this system when it comes to counting stats. He doesn't get tons of blocks. He doesn't get tons of steals. He fouls a fair amount. The majority of his case is built upon the team success of Oklahoma City and the job that he has done taking guys out of games, because there is no one, when tasked with a head-to-head matchup of these 7 guys, who has performed better than Lou Dort. And we've seen it against Donovan Mitchell with our own, Cavalier Thunder matchups. He was never going to do well in this category. So then And I think I want to pause here just to allow you to comment, Mike, if there was something that you took away from this that you were unaware of.
Well, when we get to our DPOY ballot, I will tell you Lou Dort will not come in 7th on mine. And I think some of the stuff with Lou Dort, as you mentioned, is his effectiveness against guys as opposed to the numbers he puts up. And numbers can be deceiving. You can be a great steals guy and a bad defender. That means you gamble all the time. It's like a defensive back in football who gambles and gets beat. I don't think it's necessarily the case with Dyson Daniels. I also wasn't aware of how many more steals Dyson Daniels had than anyone else on the list. I know he was having an incredible defensive season. I looked at the season ranks. I didn't go to the totals, but that is a mind-boggling number that he's at 230, 223, and no one's even in triple digits other than that. Right? Like, wasn't second in steals?
It's an obscene difference. And I think this also speaks to that. I'm putting up something on here. Now, I just tabulate these myself. These aren't necessarily counting stats, but this was taking the counting stats and looking at the ratio between stocks, steals and blocks combined, versus fouls committed. And when you do that, Dyson Daniels is far and away in first place because he accumulates such an obscene amount of steals and blocks collectively that he's outpaced even Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley is a respectable second. And again, by the way, Draymond Green, 6th out of these 7 guys. Now, beyond that, then I looked at contested shots to fouls because contesting a lot of shots, obviously a good thing. Not fouling while you're doing it, even better. The ratio here is absolutely ridiculous. Evan Mobley is 5.25 contested shots for every foul that he does. Draymond Green is barely half of that at 2.82. Zubac, nearly 4.75. He's 4.66. That speaks to the idea of being able to contest shots without fouling. Just a good thing. I thought that was an interesting thing to look at because that helps kind of take away some of the things that we just alluded to, Mike, as far as when somebody accumulates so many of something that the difference between first and second isn't accurately reflected. The problem for Dyson Daniels is that a lot of his individual metrics aren't good. And we'll see that in the advanced part. The team defense is bad. Excuse me. Apologize, guys. Fighting off a cold.
I'll pick it up for you, Bob, real quick. On the rest of that, Amen Thompson being Mr. Consistent throughout that chart kind of stood out to me. I had him in the conversation for my all-defensive team. I hadn't considered him in the conversation for DPOY, and maybe that's an overlook on my end. But his freaky athleticism, however the term is, puts him in a situation to be able to make plays a lot of guys simply cannot. Jaren Jackson missing a few games late certainly hurts his candidacy. But Dyson Daniels of all these is the one that so far has opened my eyes. I'll get to all my Lou Dort stuff in a little bit because I do think this first round of graphics does not do him justice.
No.
I don't think he's 7 out of 7 if those are the 7 guys in terms of DPOY voting, which we'll get into in a sec. But that was kind of my big takeaway from the first counting stats was Dyson Daniels and the steals. Ridiculous. And the stocks to foul and shot contest to foul is a great way to look at, all right, how many plays are you involved in that end in a positive for the defensive player as opposed to the other guy going to the line for 2 shots. And it certainly helps that Evan ranks quite highly in both of those if you are looking to cast a proper ballot.
Yeah, I think my takeaway, if I had gone in and you would let me see no basketball, my takeaway after looking at the counting stats part of this would be that Zubac is not getting talked about enough. He's an absolute Iron Man, plays a ton of minutes, contests a ton of shots, does very well in all of these metrics. Really, the one thing, and his team defense has been unbelievable. They're a top 4 defense for the entirety of the season, basically. And he's been a huge part of that. Amen Thompson, I think, we saw what he did against Steph Curry just a week or so ago, where he took him out of the game, absolutely smothered him in that Houston Rockets victory. I think the fact that he's done all this in a season where he wasn't even the starter to begin the season makes this incredibly impressive to me, because in a lot of ways, Amen Thompson, to me, if this was a full season run-up, it wouldn't even be a question. One other thing I wanted to, this really has nothing to do with anything. I'm not speaking to the validity of this stat. I just think if we can talk about, have you seen Highlander, Mike? Are you familiar with the movie Highlander?
I am not, unfortunately.
Well, the gist of it is that in order to become the Highlander, you have to chop the head off the previous one. There can only be one. That is the tagline, I believe, of the movie. So I did this a couple weeks ago, and I saw your Klevta on Twitter was talking to you, and he kind of ran down my little presentation here. But I think it's interesting if nothing else, I wanted to bring up an idea of what did these guys do when head-to-head? Because certainly Defensive Player of the Year candidates would get up when they're guarding each other. And so I compiled their performance against all the other people. Now, 3 of the guys didn't make this list because I did this when I was fighting another agenda a few weeks ago. But what you'll see on here, interestingly enough, we won't dwell on it. Evan Mobley has held these other Defensive Player of the Year candidates, Dyson Daniels, Jaren Jackson Jr., Draymond Green, to a combined 3 of 19 shooting. That is 16% from the floor and has not committed a single foul. Who's performed worse in these matchups? Well, that would be Draymond Green, who has allowed his opponents to shoot nearly 50%, committed a couple fouls, and a losing record. At the time I made this graphic, 3-4. I believe he has one more matchup with the Grizzlies that might not have factored in there, but just wanted to throw that out there before we got into the second part of this, which is the advanced metrics. That's right. Now,
let's do it.
I did a similar thing to what I did here. I decided I cherry-picked things that I thought were good things to look at that weren't counting stats, that were instead metrics that influenced, defensive performance of a player. There's different ones that I will qualify away or at least offer some context to, but here they are, 11 different metrics. The first one, I grabbed 3 quote-unquote catch-all metrics. We've alluded to them here. Defensive estimated plus-minus from dunks and threes, defensive basketball plus-minus from Basketball Reference, and defensive LeBron from Basketball Index. And then I took all those and I compiled a composite score of those 3. So from there, I looked at defensive on-off. Mike has alluded to that, but that measures the difference between a team's defensive performance when a player is on the floor and off the floor. Yes, absolutely super relevant, because obviously if your team gets significantly worse when you go to the bench, it speaks to you probably having some value. Defensive win shares. Now, this one is heavily team influenced. If you look at win shares over the course of the season, oftentimes they are highly correlated to the best teams out there. It estimates the number of wins a player contributes to their team through their defensive effort. Not a perfect metric, but still something I thought was relevant to look at because I've seen people cite it. Defensive rating. That's the points allowed per 100 possessions while the player is on the floor. Also heavily team influence because your team could be clamping up and you could be reaping the rewards. Plus minus, we've talked about that. Everybody understands that what that is. I won't dwell on that. Defensive field goal percentage differential. Now, this is the difference between the field goal percentage an opponent shoots when guarded by a player versus what he averages against all opponents. So essentially, if you hold a player to a worse percentage than what he normally shoots, you're going to have a good defensive field goal differential. Now, I broke this into both a defensive field goal differential at the rim, and separately, I looked at what it would be at the three-point line, as well as the collective total. Rim frequency. That is a fact. That is a stat, rather, that it tabulates the percent of opponent shot attempts that a player is able to contest at the rim. The higher the percentage, the better. If Evan Mobley is blocking 80%, he has an 80% rim frequency. That means that he is, he's blocking that much stuff at the rim. He is accounting for a huge portion of his team's blocks during the course of the game. Block percentage is, of course, that percentage that the opponent actually blocks. Rim frequency is the amount he contests essentially, and block percentage is the percentage of shots that an opponent puts up that he blocks. Steal percentage, equivalent thing. You know what that is. So I did the advanced composite there. I want to bring up a look at this just so that you can see the table of data on these advanced metrics. Let me decline this. Sorry. I don't know, this is what I get for tying this to my computer. Okay, so what I did here was I tabulated the defensive on-off, and I looked at all these things. We'll begin with this one because this is a good one to check out in the sense of, let's add this to the stage. Let's remove this one. There we go. All right. So, Mike, what we're looking at is the defensive on-off. You alluded to it before. I looked at it this morning, so these are the stats on NBA.com as of this morning. The performance of the team, Jaren Jackson Jr. leads this stat. Essentially, him off the floor has meant bad things for the Grizzlies. Same with Zubac. Evan Mobley's a respectable third. As you get further down the list, what you find is some surprising things, which is that for both Dyson Daniels and Dort, their teams have performed better when they're off the floor defensively, which logically makes no sense. That's why I say with all these things, you want to somewhat take them with a grain of salt. When we go to defensive win shares, what do we see there? Well, Ivica, Zubac, Thompson, Dort, Evan Mobley. What you'll see here is what I said. it correlates a lot with team success in many ways. All these teams are very good, but the ones at the top tend to be the best teams. And as you go down the list, generally speaking, there is a pretty high correlation between where you sit and how good your team is. That's why when you see something like Jaren Jackson Jr., he's outpacing Draymond Green, despite the fact that Memphis is currently, they're neck and neck with the Golden State Warriors. When you see guys rise above their station, like Zubac's here, I think this is a credit to him.
Yeah.
Because the Clippers, they're not better than Houston. They're not better than Oklahoma City. They're not better than the Cavs. And despite that, Zubac is at the top of this list for defensive win shares per game. Now, when we go to defensive rating, a high defensive rating is bad. I really should sort this opposite. But again, it's a very highly correlated to team success metric. If you go down this list, it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio of, okay, a guy who's good is playing for the best team. Again, I think this speaks to Zubac having a very good season because Lou Dort, that is not a shock. You will see OKC dominate all of these defensive rating metrics for a team. And as individuals, you could get most of their roster would finish better than the majority of other teams, even their best players. You could get guys like Sam Merrill on a team that you could get a Sam Merrill equivalent. You could get somebody who's primarily known for his offensive contributions, but is out there a lot with effective defensive units, and he'll find himself with a giant defensive rating. So I thought that was interesting. Now, when we get to plus minus, I put this in here mainly because it's kind of free from bias. It's just what it is. It's what your team has performed. You can say that a lot of this is based on offense. It's not really even totally a defensive leaning stat, and that's absolutely true. But what you'll see is that Evan Mobley, when he's out there on the floor, nobody performs better than Evan Mobley and the units that have been alongside him. And Draymond Green is second to last on that list. Amen Thompson, a man who played the majority of the first half of this season coming off the bench, has a better plus minus than Draymond Green, which I think is very interesting considering how much we're force-fed this narrative that Draymond just plays winning basketball. Now, to defensive field goal percentage differential. Again, I should have sorted this in the opposite way. Jaren Jackson Jr. This is a metric he did very well in, both at the rim. These categories here. This is overall that I'm, hovering my mouse over. This is the rim, and this is three-point percentage. At the rim, Jaren Jackson Jr. is making his opponent shoot 14% worse than they would against, any average defender over the course of the season. Evan Mobley is respectable. He's nearly at 9%. Draymond Green and Amen Thompson, though, slightly better at the rim. Now, the three-point differential is interesting because Evan Mobley, that's a pretty strong one from him. Amen Thompson, the best of these 7 candidates in terms of making his opponent shoot worse from the three-point arc than they do over the course of the season. Lou Dort, unsurprisingly, second, but then Evan Mobley and Jaren Jackson Jr. tie for third. When we go to rim frequency, what we see is that Evan Mobley's first, Dyson Daniels is a respectable second. I don't think anybody was expecting to see that, but some of that speaks to the fact that you have to consider the team around it, because if that's the percentage of shots that you challenge for your team, a lot of times if you don't have a true elite rim protector, you're going to see higher block percentages from guys in other positions. That's why I think this number from Draymond Green is woeful. 32% on a team that's largely devoid of true size outside of, Kevon Looney, and you've got Quentin Post out there. I don't think it's a situation where he's second to last. Again, Lou Dort is the only other guy with a lower rim frequency than Draymond Green. When you go to block percentage, how much you successfully block, Evan Mobley runs away with that. He is a full 10% above second place, which unsurprisingly is Jaren Jackson Jr. Zubac is in third. At the bottom of this list, Lou Dort, Dyson Daniels in sixth, and Draymond Green in fifth. I think what you should be taking away from these is that we already knew the counting stats was going heavily in favor of Evan Mobley over, say, a Draymond Green. But what we're seeing when you add the context of the other contenders for this award is that Draymond doesn't even stack up all that great against some of those guys. When you go to steal percentage, Dyson Daniels at over 40%, Evan Mobley second to last there, 16%. But Draymond Green, that area, even there, if you look at Draymond Green next to Amen Thompson, how many of you would have realized that Amen Thompson is just as effective in terms of block percentage and steal percentage as Draymond Green, and gets none of the headlines, by the way? And that arrives we arrive at the composite advanced score, which I'll show you the graphic for this, but I'll hover over it here so that you can see. This is the tabulated score here. And what you get is Amen Thompson.
By a landslide.
By a landslide. When you look at the composite score of the advanced metrics, it goes Amen Thompson first, Jaren Jackson Jr. second, Evan Mobley third, Zubac fourth, Draymond fifth, Lou Dort sixth, Dyson Daniels seventh. So Dyson Daniels, he enjoys none of the benefits in a lot of these advanced metrics that he does with some of the counting stats things. And understandably, that's where we've arrived. So I don't know if that reconciles with what you thought it would be, Mike, but did you see anything here that surprised you?
Yeah, Amen Thompson, I knew was a good defender. I didn't realize was that level of defender in terms of the advanced metrics, the rim protection, the steal rate, being right on par with Draymond Green. It's not surprising because I knew he could do it. I just didn't realize that he was credited with so much of Houston's defensive success because they have a bunch of guys on that defense outside of Fred VanVleet that get after you. Tari Eason, Dylan Brooks, Şengün's not a traffic cone. They got guys that can play defense, but the fact that he stands out above the rest was impressive. The defensive field goal percentage against from three, I think it's a hard stat to truly quantify because a lot of that's just make or miss by the other player. Like at the rim, I feel like there's more variance in the rim deterrence and the defensive field goal percentage against down there. 3.1 hit or miss. And the fact that Zubac is right in the middle again, he is not a guy, I'll be honest, that I gave any real credence to in my defensive player of the year thought, Bob, and that may be just a miss by me. I don't consider Ivica Zubac a elite level defender. I consider him a good defender. He's a body in the way. I knew he's a great rebounder, but those defensive metrics surprised me a lot at how highly he tested out in both the counting stats and the advanced stats. Because some guys, like you said, can thrive in one, and when you get to the nitty gritty in the other, it's like, well, he doesn't have it to back up. Zubac scored high in both. So he's a guy that when we get to our all defensive team, he was not on my list, and I may have to alter it by the end of the season because of all the players that you changed my opinion on, his was the most changed of where it started to where we're at now.
Well, you know what I think he suffers from a little bit is that he does things incredibly well that we've seen conventional centers for the entirety of our lifetime do well. Like now there's so much focus on the Jaren Jackson Jr.'s and the Mobleys who can go from the rim all the way to the three-point line that when you get, a meat and potato center like Zubac, who's just available all the time, rips down boards like nobody else, contests very well at the rim, it's almost taken for granted to a certain extent. But the volume at which he does it on an elite defense like the Clippers have been, I do think he gets undersold a lot. And that's why I'll begin with my first team all defense because I think I already put it on the screen stupidly. But
you did.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise to anyone that Evan Mobley makes my team. Dyson Daniels, I'm not the biggest Dyson advocate in the sense that I do feel like I don't put the kind of, first of all, only two guards have won Defensive Player of the Year in the history of the award. Gary Payton in 96 and then Marcus Smart in 2022. And I don't think anybody thinks Marcus Smart was the right selection. That was certainly a product of people being like, well, let's just take the best defender on the best defense. That didn't age well. I thought it was terrible at the time. And I think now, if you talk about it 3 years removed, basically the consensus is, what the hell were we doing? It is very difficult for a guard to win the award. I will say this has softened me on my adamance that Dyson Daniels, there's a chasm in my mind between Lou Dort and Dyson Daniels. I think they're very different players. I do think when you look at the sheer volume, and I think it's Michael Pena. I thought he wrote an excellent write-up on his awards thing about Dyson Daniels. I think that's worth reading too for anybody who has not seen it because it talks about, he may be doing it in categories you don't conventionally value. Deflections and steals don't necessarily mean that he's some lockdown defender at the point of attack or that he doesn't gamble too much or any of those things. But the sheer volume at which he's doing it it's historically very significant. It's not something we've seen very often. So in addition to that, I will put Lou Dort on here, and I get anybody who sat through this little PowerPoint presentation of mine would say, your numbers really didn't support him very well. Like, yes, he has the best defense, and it's a historically great defense in Oklahoma City, but that's a team effort. Is that enough? And what I would say to that is that you just have to trust me that if you go and you look at his head-to-head matchups, just consider some of this. Okay, I'm going to shotgun a bunch of these for you. Anthony Edwards held him to sub 38% shooting. Lauri Markkanen held him to sub 17% shooting. James Harden, 20% shooting. Kyrie Irving, 32% shooting. Donovan Mitchell, 23% shooting, 3 of 13 from the field. He has been deployed with a singular focus. It's not to go out there and block shots. It's not even to go out there and get steals. It's to go out there and deter the best player on the other team from getting shots up, period.
Yep.
To train wreck another team's whole offense. And that is something from a metrics, from an analytics standpoint, is not always quantifiable. So he was the third guy on my team. Amen Thompson and Zubac rounded out as 4 and 5 because I think they have the team success. Their defenses are both better than the Golden State Warriors and have been for the entirety of this season. They just haven't gone on a late run after they added Jimmy Butler. They have been good start to finish, and these guys have been huge parts of that. Zubac is the anchor of that defense. There's no question. And Amen Thompson, despite benefiting from being on a team that has a lot of good defenders, individual defenders, he has absolutely wrecked shop, and he's done it in both ways. He's one of these true hybrid players who he might not be as long as an Evan Mobley, but he's strong, he's athletic. I trust him to guard both up and down the roster, from big to small. So my 5 would be Evan Mobley, Dyson Daniels, Lou Dort, Amen Thompson, Zubac. Now, before I have you reveal yours, I just want to ask one thing here. My team happened to have some balance. That was really just coincidental. I think conventionally, there's always a conversation about.
I try to keep it traditional too.
Yeah. See, I wasn't even trying to do that. It ended up that way. But what I don't like is this idea. I've heard people make this argument with the defensive teams specifically. They want to balance them out. And yet, when we get to the all-NBA teams, they'll say, well, it's positionless, so we don't have to take a center because for years we had to take a center and they were making first, second, and third team, and there was better players who were getting left out. I feel like if it's positionless for all-NBA, I'm totally fine. I would put 5 centers on a team. Other people don't feel that way. I feel like from what you said, you're not in that camp. Mine just worked out that way, but by no means do I feel obligated to force feed in guards unless I feel like the data and the eyeball test supports it.
I don't try to force feed it, but I go into it trying to think who are the best guards, the best bigs. And then if there's a guy that's just clearly better, then I will make the adjustment. I'm not locked into that, Bob, but when you see my all-NBA teams coming up, I do try to follow some semblance of a traditional NBA lineup just because I think that's how it should be. I don't agree with the whole – I understand the reasoning behind it, and I think you could blur the line between center and power forward. Like, is Evan Mobley a center or a power forward? He's a big. I get that. So, but for my defensive team, and I already don't like my answer, so I'm changing a guy on the fly, Bob. You have convinced me on one.
Okay.
I had, in no order, 4 locks. Mobley, Dort, I do believe Draymond's a lock. I'll explain that in one sec. And Dyson Daniels. Those are the 4 locks I had. And the reason I had Draymond as a lock here, Bob, is I was going over and making my Mobley propaganda PowerPoint. All the stuff on B-Ball Index that I know from my eyes of watching Evan Mobley 70-plus times and 35 times in person this season that he does incredibly well. There were some stats that Draymond was even better at, according to B-Ball Index. And you mentioned, how do you calculate some of those things? The truth is, I don't know how they come up with some of those numbers. But I know when Evan scores in the 96th percentile or something that I think, and I know he's incredible at because my eyes have told me, and Draymond's in the 98th or 99th percentile, then at least whatever they're calculating that puts Evan there, Draymond must be doing stuff that I'm not seeing close enough on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, maybe it's a cop-out answer because I'm trusting a statistic I don't know how it's formulated, but when it matches the eye test and the stuff that I know Evan's incredible at, that they say Draymond might be even better, that is an all-NBA caliber defensive player in my mind.
I would say this, Mike. The 7 guys I put up there, I included those 7 because I think any one of them had a valid case. So this idea that just because Draymond didn't make mine, first of all, I obviously hate his guts. I'd like to think I'm free from bias when it comes to this. I try to do it as objectively as possible.
We're all human beings. I'm
just a man. So I'm not saying that there is no wrong answer here. I just wanted to try to support my case with data where I could so that people would understand I'm not just shotgunning bullshit out into the universe.
So those are my 4. The other guys I considered, and Zubac was not on it, and hand up, and now he is. I'm going to talk out my final thought process. One guy you didn't mention here, Bob, was Toumani Camara of the Portland Trailblazers. Now, Lou Dort was the best individual defender I saw all season. I'll save some of the spiel for that when we get to our DPOY ballot. Toumani Camara was second. And I am way too invested in Portland because I like some of the young guys on that team. I love Scoot. I think Shaedon Sharp's incredible. I watched a ton of Portland basketball. Don't ask why. But Toumani Camara drew the toughest assignment every night. And I have no idea where he matches up in some of these composites. And because Portland wasn't good, I'm sure he gets dinged on the defensive rating and all that stuff. But Bob, there are not many guys in basketball, if more than 2 or 3 in the league, that can take out a 5'11 point guard or a 6'8 small forward as well and as effectively as Toumani Camara does. And the entire Portland defensive strategy was essentially, Toumani, you take their best player, you're going to fight over every damn screen, you're going to pick up 94 feet, and we're going to play 4-on-4 because you're taking out one of those guys. So Camara was in the conversation, but after seeing your entire presentation here, I'm down to Zubac versus Amen Thompson. And I think I am going to go with Amen Thompson simply because of the consistency and the... No, you know what? This is the toughest I've ever had to make. Bob, you got me in a pickle.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to go with Amen Thompson because he was on my list before this. And despite your terrific evidence backing up that Zubac should be in this conversation, Amen Thompson was one of the guys I had considered for this. So because he was higher in the preseason rankings, and that's a terrible way because college football sucks at preseason rankings and how that ends up influencing bowl games and the college football playoff when those comes out. Because I had Amen Thompson higher going into this, and they both got a boost from your presentation, I'm going to give Amen Thompson my 5th spot on the all-defensive team. So my 5 would be Mobley, Draymond, Dort, Daniels, and Amen Thompson.
Okay, so the guys that didn't make it from this group that I highlighted would have been, I guess, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zubac.
And Toumani Camara would be my 3 that got left off.
Speaking of, I will just throw up my second team. I didn't ask you to prepare this, so
I did not. But you have those 3 on it plus someone else.
Boom. Toumani Camara. I agreed with you there. I threw Draymond on there. I got Jaren Jackson Jr. on there. And then my other guys were, I think I put Jalen Williams on here because they have been so historically great as a team. It's similar to how I feel when we talk about the all-NBA teams on the offensive side, which is 2 Cavs have to make it, in my view. You can quibble about what teams they make and who deserves to go where, but for a defense as historically incredible as what Oklahoma City's put forth, it's always going to be tough to attribute credit. I think he would be the guy that I look to and say, okay, he makes the second team for me. And Gobert, that's a lot of, people are so used to him. I think we kind of take for granted when he has just a normal season that's maybe not at the top of all these.
He's still really damn good at what he does.
He's still really damn good. I agree.
Can I make one suggestion of this, Bob?
Yes.
You know how you don't like Draymond? I don't like Rudy. I would put the ghost of Victor Wembanyama in that spot, even though he doesn't qualify. Just because this was Wemby's award, and Wemby will be a staple on the defensive team if he met the 65-game threshold. So instead of Rudy, just because I simply don't like Rudy, I would put the ghost of Wembanyama on there. And Jalen Williams is on my All-NBA 3rd team, Bob. So I'm right there with you in terms of his importance to the defensive success this year of the Thunder.
Yes, so I would agree with you. The one thing that was eye-opening when I was pouring through the counting numbers is how many of them Wembanyama still leads or is super high.
Crazy.
What we saw from Dyson Daniels, you would be seeing, you still are seeing from Victor Wembanyama in a lot of these things where it's like, this wouldn't even be a contest. That's why I'm so invested in this though, Mike, because
this is Evan's chance to win.
If
we're being honest. This is his chance to win. He was healthy, Wemby wasn't. If Wemby's healthy, he is going to win this award 13, 14, 15, 16, however many years he plays. He is the most impactful defender in the league. And Bob, I have a former college teammate of mine who's an assistant coach in the NBA now. And I texted him the other day when we were talking about the DPOY vote. And he goes, I'd still vote for Wemby. And I'm like, he doesn't count. He goes, I don't care. I'd still vote for Wemby. If he played one game, he would qualify to get my vote. And I said, why? And he said, almost verbatim, if he's on the court, you can't do 30% of the things you want to do as an offense. So I said, okay, what about Evan if he's on the court? He goes, it's 5% for every other great defender in basketball. It's 30% for Wemby. That's the difference between Wemby and everyone else defensively. And that's just one assistant coach's opinion who doesn't play the Spurs more than twice a season. So take it with a grain of salt. But when Wemby is on the court, Bob, it changes the complete trajectory, the geometry, the offensive philosophy of what you can do offensively against the Spurs. And it's a shame that he got hurt because He's a lot of fun to watch, and I miss watching Wembanyama play basketball.
I second that. Plus, who knows what kind of humiliating highlights we would have got if he was in that game against Golden State the other day.
Great point.
I want to bring this up one more time just to drive it home, because sometimes when we're getting into these things, it's tough to. This was the composite score for the advanced metrics. Again, just to reinforce, because I've said it, and sometimes I don't support it every podcast, but when I've said I would put him on Thompson on the team over a Draymond Green, I think the fact that we've been told the whole later part of this campaign, in March especially, that, okay, Draymond Green is making this huge push and he's the, neck and neck with Evan Mobley. When you look at both the counting and the advanced, in the advanced metrics, Jaren Jackson Jr., because of what he forces people to shoot in terms of percentages, he stacks up very well in this. But for Thompson to do this, and then when you look at the counting side of it, to finish a respectable fourth, despite the fact that he's played half the season as a starter, I think it speaks to the fact that these two guys here, Zubac and Thompson, and just to drive this point home, have gotten not nearly enough credit. And we need to stop with this campaigning, tolerating it, essentially, for Draymond Green, because if you look at it from either prism, be it counting stats or advanced metrics, very pedestrian. Fifth in the advanced metrics, sixth in the counting stat metrics. So I just wanted to reinforce that one more time, because it's just, I don't think there's a wrong answer here. My votes would go to Evan Mobley first. I would put Lou Dort second.
Me too.
And that's propped up primarily because what he's done. I mean, let's see if I can share this tab just so that you can see. I'm going to bring this up on the screen. These are just head-to-head numbers. And I will zoom in here so that you can see the column that we're talking about here. But, look at what he's done against these head-to-head matchups. It's ridiculous. And when you compare that to some of the other people out there, a lot of times guys will be, high 40s, 50% against these elite guys. Night after night, Lou Dort has just blanketed these guys in a way that I don't think gets enough coverage and will never be quantifiable. So my vote would go Evan Mobley first, Lou Dort second. And then my third place vote, it was tough. I was deciding between Amen Thompson, Dyson Daniels, and Zubac. And I think, just because I think what he's doing this season is so historical, that Dyson Daniels would get my third place vote as a way to reward him for what he's accomplished. Even as I say that, if I concede the fact that I think in terms of actual impact within a team structure, that Zubac or Thompson might be more important.
I did not read the Michael Pena piece. I'm going to do that as soon as we get off this podcast here. So maybe my decision will be influenced and change after reading that. But I had Mobley 1. I also had Lou Dort at 2, Bob. And the part of the reason for the Lou Dort is, I have never seen Donovan Mitchell look as discombobulated as I did during that 48-minute stretch in which Oklahoma City played Cleveland here in Cleveland. And then it was replicated to a T, if not even worse, when they went on the road a week later to OKC and got their asses handed to them. I watched an OKC Clippers game the other day. It looked like James Harden was in hell for 48 minutes. It looked like he could not wait for the final buzzer to sound on that clock.
Well, to
so he
speak
can go home and play anyone else. And I have talked to enough guys around the league that say their best players hate playing Oklahoma City, not because the whole team defense is swarming and ferocious and tenacious, because it is, but because their best guy is going to be hounded by Lou Dort for 48 minutes. The guy's built like a Mack truck. He could play middle linebacker for the Cleveland Browns tomorrow. And if you put him in pads and you blinked, you would have no idea whether or not he was an NBA starting shooting guard or the prototypical middle linebacker in the NFL. He fouls a little too much. He gets away with a little too much physicality for my liking that goes unwhistled. However, if you get away with it, go do it. And he is the best defensive player on the historically best defensive team we've seen in a long, long time in the NBA. And what he does from an individual standpoint on taking out the other team's best scorer 1 through 4, I had him at number 2. And then I went with Draymond at number 3. But honestly, it was Lou Dort 2, Evan 1, and then third, I think there's a case to be made for the other 5 guys we talked about.
For me, it goes, if I was tiering this, 1 and 2 were, I barely had to think about it. And then when I was deciding on third, for me, my tier was Daniel, Zubac, Amen Thompson. And then I had Draymond and Jaren Jackson in their own tier below that because, quite frankly, I think that the counting metrics aren't there. I also think they foul too much. And the team impact, it's not significantly different enough. Like, yes, Golden State is one spot above us in defensive rating, but the guys they're being paralleled against, the Clippers are a great defense. Houston is a great defense. Us, the Warriors, the Grizzlies, those team defenses are closer in gap. They don't get that bump from elite team defense that some of the others did for me. So
I agree. All right, but let's run through the all NBA teams because I'm very curious to see.
Yeah, this is not going to be nearly as detailed. We're shotgunning
this is from the hip. I have no stats. This is all feel and vibes. But
okay, give me your first team all NBA.
I think there are 4 locks for the first team.
I think we're going to be in agreement.
SGA,
yep.
Jokic, Tatum, and Giannis. Locks in stone. I will hear no argument against those 4 being on the all NBA first team. The 5th spot, I've had Mitchell there all season. Anthony Edwards is making a hell of a case to take over Donovan Mitchell's 5th spot. But at the end of the day, I do believe, as I mentioned earlier in the DPOY conversation, if it is close enough, team success matters. And the Cavs have been the best team in basketball for a large part of the season. They have clinched the number 1 seed in the East. And Donovan hasn't played a meaningful basketball game since he came back from 22 points down against the Boston Celtics. I'm not going to penalize him and drop him down a spot despite his March slumps when they were playing for, frankly, nothing. So I have Donovan Mitchell rounding out my first team, which gives me Mitchell, SGA, Giannis, Tatum, and Jokic on my first team.
We are in consensus on that. I was on the fence with Brunson or Anthony Edwards, but when Brunson missed the string of games he did, that was enough for me. Despite the fact that Mitchell has not had, the best month in terms of percentages and things like that. I just don't. The team is so good. I think it's close enough that the team bump should be significant to get him up there to first team.
And if he played more minutes like Edwards and Brunson, his numbers would look a lot different.
When LeBron was on that tear in February, and I was reading, he's going to make first team, people dismissed the fact. Well, even take the player of the month in February. Because I toxically online, I see people complaining about Tatum not winning it, and that month he played a full 6 minutes more a game, and the numbers were basically parallel.
Yeah.
When you go to per 36, it becomes a lot less debatable. Now, you don't have to use that if you don't think it's a valid way to make an assessment. But I do think the context of Donovan doing all this without having a ton of garbage time where he hasn't played, with not needing to do those things, that kind of makes it more impressive. Because if your pathway to less minutes is because you haven't needed to play extended minutes, well, then shouldn't it be a credit for putting the boot on the throat to some extent as a team and as an individual? So who is your second team all NBA?
I went back and forth on this. There are a couple of guys on my third team that certainly could be second team. But as of today, my second team was Ant Edwards, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Evan Mobley, and Karl Anthony Towns. Which, once again, I tried to stick alongside a realistic roster construction with guards, wings, and bigs. But I feel pretty good about that one, even though Cade Cunningham and Jalen Brunson certainly have an argument to be on the second team over Steph. But at the end of the day, I went Edwards, Steph, LeBron, Mobley, and Cat.
Well, I'll start with Mobley because he made my second team. That I don't need to explain that to you. Jalen Brunson, I put him on ahead of Karl Anthony Towns because I just think
I have Brunson third team for the record, just so when we go back and forth in this, I have Brunson on my third team.
Yeah, well, I assumed as much when you were saying you were deciding between those guys. So I went Mobley, I went Brunson, I went Ant Edwards. He was really kind of the first guy on that list. He would have been the next up for me too. So those three. Then Steph Curry made mine. Cade went down to the third team. Karl Anthony Towns was the last guy on the second team for me. And I had a hard time deciding between him and LeBron James and Jaren Jackson Jr. That spot, honestly, I could have flipped in any scenario, because when I got to the third team, LeBron, Jaren Jackson Jr., Jalen Williams, they were the other three that made up those spots for me.
So my third team was Brunson, Cade, Jaren Jackson Jr., Jalen Williams, and Alperen Sengun.
Oh, yeah. See, Cade was my last one on the third team. Alperen did not make mine. So he was the one guy, I guess, that was off.
So so we agreed on 14 of 15. Who's the one guy you had that I didn't? Read me your second team again, second and third.
All right. So I had Mobley, Jalen, Ant, Karl Anthony Towns, and Steph on my second team. I had Jalen, LeBron, Jaren Jackson Jr., Cade Cunningham, and I must have lost someone in the shuffle here.
Yeah, you gave me 9 guys there, and the 10th is who we're missing. Here, I'll name my second team. You cross them off your list, okay?
Okay.
Edwards, both have.
Yep.
Steph, both have.
Yep.
LeBron, both have.
Yeah, he's third team for me, though.
But I'm just saying, of the 10 guys on second and third. Mobley, both have.
Yep.
Cat, both have.
Yep.
Brunson, both have.
Yes.
Cade Cunningham, both have.
Yes.
Jaren Jackson Jr., both have.
Yes.
Do you have Jalen Williams in your top 3 teams?
I do. I have Jalen Williams.
And then Şengün's my last one. So whoever's your last would be our differentiating spot. Did you only pick 9 guys, Bob?
I think I did. I think I left one off on third team. I think Şengün's a good choice, though. Somebody has to get on for that Houston team. If I was going to pick one, you know what? Şengün it is. You've talked me into my incompetence.
Awesome.
Okay, so that brings us to, let's talk about Coach of the Year briefly. I said on the last pod, I won't reiterate it here. You can listen back if you want to know my case, but my case at the time was Kenny Atkinson, Ime Udoka, and then JB Bickerstaff. And I will just tell you the brief reason why I didn't put JB second. That's because all I've heard all season is, well, they went from 14 teams to, mid 40s. 14 teams last year was clearly at the end of that. The over-under coming into the season was about 23 wins, 22 and a half. Now, they've far outperformed that. They'll probably outperform it by anywhere from 17 to 20 games. You look at Houston, their over-under coming into the season was 42 and a half. They're full 10 games above that now. In a tougher Western Conference, I believe just fundamentally it's tougher to go from good to great than it is to go from woeful to mediocre. So while I think JB Bickerstaff has been incredible, the way that Houston is closed, the conference that they're doing it in, and the difficulty to go from a good team to a top of the West team would have me put Udoka over a JB Bickerstaff. And also, I think it's relevant to say that I do believe fundamentally that Detroit had a better constructed roster this year going into it. Beyond the fact that, yes, they've got huge jumps from Cade Cunningham, but Malik Beasley proved to be a huge addition. Ivy made a big jump, and JB had an impact, certainly. Their defense much better, the way they play, the physicality, all that stuff I think is impressive. I think there's a lot of parallels, though, with Houston. Very rugged team, getting a lot out of guys, and a bunch of individual players making jumps at the same time. So that would be mine.
Yeah, I mean, this award is stupid. Let me preface that. And so is the NFL's Coach of the Year award, because typically they give it to the guy who has the lowest expectations and outperforms them. Who's to say Kenny's done a better job coaching than JB has in Detroit, or Ime's done with Houston, or Dagnall and OKC's? You know what I mean? Like who's to say that his coaching is the reason that Evan Mobley took this jump? I think a lot of times we give coaches credit for guys making jumps when a lot of it should be on the players.
Kenny says that, and basically so many press conferences. He'll be like, not me, it's the roster.
Yeah, so it's like, I would give it to Kenny because I agree with the premise. It's a lot harder to go from good to elite, and like good to historically elite like Cleveland's been this season, than it is to go from 14 to 42 wins, even though the number of teams in the history of the NBA that have tripled their win total from a year prior to the current season, the JB Bickerstaff-led Pistons are going to be the second team ever, I believe, to do that. And the first team was the Charlotte Hornets, who won 7 games in a shortened season, who then won 22 games the following year. So, like, there's a historical precedent to what Detroit's doing, but I'd give it to Kenny. They won 63 games, and they haven't played a meaningful game in a month and a half. The season's been over for them essentially since the end of February when they came back from 22 down against Boston. He completely reinvented an offensive system that, hand up my bet, I had serious question marks if the roster would work together. And now not only does it work, but it's flexible enough and versatile enough to eliminate opponents from a playoff series by attacking them with 2 bigs, or going with DeAndre Hunter at the 4 with either big at the 5. You can play 1 guard. You can play 3. Kenny has unlocked so much in this offense that I frankly did not know existed, that I would give him the edge over everybody else. But to say I think he's a slam dunk home run winner in this because of what he did coaching as opposed to player improvement on an individual basis compared to what JB did for Cade Cunningham and Ivy and Malik Beasley and what Ime's done for Amen Thompson and those guys, there's no way to truly quantify it. My money would be on Kenny Atkinson. I'm biased. I like Kenny a lot. He's a great dude, and he's been incredibly friendly to the media. And unlike last year with JB, and no disrespect to JB, talking to him was miserable. And when Kenny talks now, it's like,
no disrespect.
Pre-game and post-game press conferences are fun because you're going to get some information, and he's actually going to answer and engage. So I'm biased, like hand up. But I would vote for Kenny Atkinson.
Yeah, I would vote for Kenny too. Now, let's move on to another one we've heard of Cav link to, 6th man of the year. Give me your top 3 for that.
Okay, did not prepare for this whatsoever. So Pritchard has to be in the conversation.
Pritchard is the odds-on front runner. Some of the other names in it would be Ty Jerome, DeAndre Hunter.
Well, is Beasley in 6th man of the year?
Beasley's in 6th man of the year, yeah.
He deserves to be there. And listen, I've said this, I'll say it again, and I have no prep on this. There has not been a more impactful guy off the bench this year than Ty Jerome. Like, I'll die on the hill. He may not have the numbers to win the award. There has not been a guy who has been able to come in and change the entire momentum of a game, to fill in when Donovan or Darius are out. His numbers when he plays, when one of those two sit, are incredible, Bob. I don't know the exact updated stats, but there was a point in the season, like late in the season, mid-February, early March, where he was averaging 19, 6, and 5 in games where he's playing over 20 minutes. Nobody on a permanent basis in the NBA has been more impactful off the bench than Ty Jerome, and he won't win the award. But frankly, if this is an award for who is the best bench player and the most impactful bench player in the league, my vote would go to Ty Jerome.
Yeah, I think he's the best bench player in the league. I think he's playing nearly 10 less minutes a game than Peyton. Peyton Pritchard was 28, 29 minutes a game off the bench. He's going to win it. I fully am ready for that to happen. In fact, I would prefer if Ty Jerome would win most improved player. But in terms of how I think the voting should go, how I think it will go in terms of 6th man of the year, I think it'll go Pritchard, Beasley, Jerome, but only because Jerome doesn't play enough minutes. Truthfully, I could stomach Pritchard winning it. I think Ty Jerome should be second. I just think there's so much positive sentiment directed around the Pistons, which this is going to sound like a Pistons dig, but sometimes I think it gets a bit much between the JB Bickerstaff thing and Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham got better. He was already great last year. The team's gotten better. Malik Beasley, great addition, incredible value signing for them. But it's just one of these things where I think Ty Jerome has a very solid case. This is not the way most improved players awarded either. But to go from not playing at all last year to being sparingly used in Golden State the year before that to being one of the best performers off the bench, if not the best in the NBA, I think there's a very solid case. If that's the way that most improved player was actually awarded, which we know that it's not. So
well, let me tease something here real quick, Bob, that I'm going to speak into the ether to hopefully it comes through. But I had a story set up with Ty and the Cavs on his unique floater game and how he's taught certain other Cavaliers members that little deceleration step that he loves that Kenny Atkinson doesn't. I was going to dive into the origins of that, and then he got hurt. So we had to push off the story, and I was informed that injured players don't do media stuff, so be it, fine, whatever. But they have 4 practices next week before the playoffs. Sure. And I am hoping that the Cavs will let me come out and sit down with Ty like we had agreed upon prior to Ty getting hurt to do this story. And just like we pushed the Evan Mobley DPOY agenda to start this, I think I have been the leader of the Ty Jerome is on the best contract in basketball train, express, bus, whatever you want to call it this season. And I can't wait.
2 months left on that train ride.
I know. I can't wait to show you guys, though, if the stars align and the Cavs allow me to go do this. And it's up to Kenny if he wants to allow media to do like kind of sit down stuff prior to a playoff series, which I totally understand if he doesn't. But if he does, it's a really cool story, and hearing Ty's perspective on some of the shots that he considers good looks that aren't good looks for 99.9% of the rest of the league. So how he gets to his spots, and it's going to be cool. So hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, this comes to fruition.
One thing I did want to point out, because I was having this discussion in the Fear the Fro Discord, my understanding, despite what I've heard Zach Lowe had said, I didn't hear the clip from Zach Lowe himself. I'm just secondhand reporting this. It does not matter that Ty Jerome doesn't play 20 minutes a game for 6 man.
He clarified that on Twitter. If you would like me to update you real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
He just tweeted this out an hour ago. Ty Jerome is eligible.
Okay. Exactly.
Is for 6 man. The 65-game, 20-minute rule does not apply to that award. Zach Lowe tweeted, I was told the rule applied, but that information was wrong. He is not eligible for most improved, but that 65-game, 20-minute rule does not apply to 6 man. Ty Jerome is, in fact, eligible.
Which makes the point that even though I think, conceptually, he's a more deserving winner for most improved player, really his avenue here is 6th man of the year. So I don't know that that'll turn out that way. knowing that that's the case for most improved player, that he's effectively disqualified, then the question becomes, do you have a strong favorite there? I'm almost uninvested in that race, so I really didn't even prepare for that because truthfully, I think the whole thing has gone off the rails. The notion of John Morant winning and then now Cade Cunningham, I almost don't care because I don't think it's at all representative of people who actually have improved.
I believe, unlike in a Coach of the Year award going from good to great, where I said that is harder, I think it is a lot easier when you are a young, blossoming player like a Cade Cunningham to go from all-star level to all-NBA level, or Evan Mobley even from being a fringe all-star last year to a bona fide second team, should be second team all-NBA guy this year, as opposed to a Ty Jerome who comes out of nowhere. And there are guys littered across the entire league, and we could rattle off 400 names if we want, Bob, of guys who were thrown to the wayside and all of a sudden develop into valuable role players on teams, and guys who come out of nowhere and you go, that like even for the Pistons, Malik Beasley, in my opinion, is more improved this season than Cade Cunningham has been. And he's not the favorite on his own team to win the award. So yeah, I think it's a Fugazi award because the voters every year change the criteria of what they're actually voting on. So I wouldn't look too far into any of the most improved player odds. Betting on it is, you might as well burn your money.
I think I'd throw it to Dyson personally. I mean,
he's a perfect example. He probably should win.
I don't think he'll win Defensive Player of the Year, but I think when you look at that trade and the aftermath, I mean, because do you remember last summer we were having conversations about him kind of being treated as a balancer in these hypothetical constructions of Jared Allen or a Darius Garland or whatever, and to see the trade that happened with DeJounte Murray and then him to come away from it, arguably is the prized asset in the whole thing in terms of his contractual control and what he's been able to do and just the utility he has in a team that features Trae Young as their primary offensive hub. You need somebody like that to balance it out. That would be my case. But again, not a real impassioned one. So I think we've touched on, have I missed it? Oh, Rookie of the Year. Did you have a favorite for that? I'll say mine, Steph Castle. I don't think there's much debate, and the fact that he just torched Draymond Green and the Warriors last night just makes me love him all the more.
I bet preseason on Risa Shea and Stephon Castle, and those are the two favorites to win the award. So whoever wins, I'm going to win some money. So I'm perfectly okay with either winning.
Okay, well, I'm not going to win anything, but somebody, that's a good plug, good segue to a plug, Mike. We're coming up on the end of the season, and some of you have probably forgotten about the Cavs consensus survey. But as these regular season games come to a close, I will tabulate up the stuff that we know. Now, a few of the answers relate to postseason results. But at the conclusion of this, those of you who lean more optimistic are probably going to be more likely to win the money here, because I was looking back to see how many people predicted the Cavs would have more than 60 wins, and it was sub 5% of the 300 some entrants that we got, almost 300 entrants. So those of you who predicted that Cavaliers would have a very good season, well, you should be on the lookout from an email from me or just listen to the pods, because somebody's going to win this money here. And Rookie of the Year was another interesting one to look back at to see who the favorites were. There were a lot of Risa Sheas. There weren't as many Castles as I thought. Almost everybody, the biggest answer in that question was Edie, which I think was very popular at the time before the season. A lot of people thought
he was the initial betting favorite. So
yeah, but as it's worked out, those of you who picked Castle probably going to end up winning this thing. That would be my guess. I do want to say though, Risa Shea, that 35 point, 5 triple night was
awesome.
Unbelievable. So, Mike, thanks, man. I know you've done several of these, but it's always my favorite thing to do to bring you on and just talk data and team and your outlook on stuff. And I'm looking forward to Cavs basketball. Anything you still want to see this regular season before we make it into the postseason?
I'm fascinated to see a couple of Luke Travers minutes down the stretch here, just because I've been fascinated with him as a prospect since he came over to the Cavaliers. I am not necessarily excited to see Imani Bates chuck up 23s tonight and probably 50 over the next 3 games. I like Imani as a person. I don't think he's ready to step in. And Imani, who has been clamoring for more minutes all season, I think is going to take this opportunity to show the Cavs what they have in him. And sometimes too much Imani is not the good version of Imani. So I'm excited to see the young guys play. And I'm also excited to see Sam Merrill be featured into Kenny Atkinson offense when he's not deferring to Donovan and Darius and Evan. And when he knows, if I touch it, it is a good look for this team. So I hope Imani does not take 23s a game. I hope Sam Merrill takes 53s a game. And you can say that's backwards. I don't care. I want to see Sam shoot. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
I have one objective, which is to keep Jared Allen first place in field goal percentage. If he's coming out there for the 82, that's all I'm concerned about. Just make the buckets you take. You can play 2 minutes and they can yank you. But if you put shots up, put them in, because I don't want some, Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley type end of the season fall off that somebody swoops in and steals that field goal percentage mantle from Jared Allen. That would be my concern. Now,
I'm with you. I'm with you, Bob. That would be a shame because he's earned it and deserves it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely does. One other thing I want to say here. Now, I know we went into a lot of data on this podcast. I am going to link to the spreadsheets that I showed on the video here in the show notes of the podcast, because there's no way to really truly do it justice without just reading numbers off, shotgun style. And so some things I blew over, but I do think you should all take a look at them, because you could look them up yourself, but I put them all in one place just to make it easy. So for those of you who've listened to this episode of the podcast, and for those of you who watched this version on YouTube, where it will be posted as well, thank you. It's the Fear the Fro podcast with Mike Lucas, McNuggets of the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. Be sure to check out his channel, subscribe, do all those things, and be on the lookout for some elite propaganda from Mike. Thank you for taking the time today, Mike.
Anytime, Bob. Pleasure talking Cavs with you.
All right, till the next time.